Hey, Greg, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. So we're both lucky. We're staying in warm climates right now. I know you're from Chicago. I'm from New York, and I'm glad I'm not in New York right now. I'm sure you're glad you're not in Chicago right now.
Very true. Yes, I'm out here in Fountain Hills, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix.
Yeah, it's an awesome area. My parents live in a suburb of Phoenix as well, so I'll be actually headed out there for a little bit myself too. But I'm enjoying what's usually sunny Los Angeles, although we've been having a boatload of rain lately. But I can't complain because people will yell at me because I'm from New York and I should be able to take this kind of colder weather. Anyway.
That's true. That's true. I mean, I'm from Chicago. We live there most of the year, but yeah, here if it gets down to like 60, people are like, "Oh my God, it's freezing." I'm like, "Come on, people! It's 60 degrees. This is warm."
I know. I've acclimated. I'm one of those people now.
Oh, okay.
And I laugh. I'm embarrassed, but it's funny. So I have to laugh at myself.
Yeah.
So it was really awesome meeting you at NAMM. And, of course I know about you. You have tons of awesome books out and you have a really illustrious playing career. And what I wanted to do today, I wanted to talk to you about your journey, your journey as a jazz musician, as an educator, also as a Stan Getz expert authority. So what I wanted to dive into first was your journey in becoming a jazz musician. Like, when did you start playing saxophone? What motivated you to play? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, when I was about 12 years old, I was a pretty unusual kid in that I was really into older TV shows, older movies, older music. So it wasn't like my peer group. Like when I was 5 years old, my favorite TV show was The Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason. And I was memorizing lines. At that point, I had a cassette recorder and I'd put it by the TV and I'd record it. And then I'd memorize the dialogue and try to say it along with, the guys on the honeymoon. And so that's really strange for a 5-year-old kid to be doing that anyway. So by the time I was around 11 or 12 years old, at that point I was into collecting like old audio equipment, like old hi-fi gear. And so I had like Nakamichi tape decks and Macintosh tube amps and stuff, when I was 12. And the guy I was friends with who kind of introduced me to that stuff, I met this guy because I was convinced that the speed on my tape deck was wrong because it didn't sound right when we play the tape in the car. And the guy repaired the thing so many times that finally he came out to meet me because he was tired of repairing this same machine over and over again. And so I wanted him to prove to me that the speed was right on the deck and that it was wrong in all these cars. And so he said, "All right, come back here." And he put the scope on it and he showed me, and we got to be sort of friends. And he was a repair technician for like a stereo shop. I was probably 25 years old, and he was really into audio equipment. And I was just starting to I was mostly listening to, I listened to some pop stuff. I was listening to the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and but still not current stuff. But he's like, "To really appreciate this gear you have, this stereo stuff, you really got to hear some acoustic music." And we started listening to this jazz stuff, and I really liked it. And I started getting into it. And I remember one day I went to the record store and I brought all my rock albums, and I said, "Look, I don't have any money, but I want to take this whole collection and switch it over to a jazz collection, okay?" And so it was like a secondhand store. And I had like 100 albums, so I just got a bunch of jazz records at once.
Wow.
And had started my collection, which you can't see. Well, here you see just a little bit of it, but I have 7,000 albums. And they were split between Phoenix and Chicago, but I just finished shipping almost all of them back to Chicago. Media mail. So the post office guys are really, I just shipped like 100 big boxes of albums. But anyway, because I lived here for a little while and then moved back to Chicago. In 2007, we moved to Phoenix. I was here for about a year and a half before I decided I'm just going to rent a place here and mainly still live in Chicago. But meanwhile, during that year and a half, the whole record collection was here. So I drive. I got tired of flying, so I drive across the country. I love driving. So I was driving the collection back with each drive. The problem was I was driving it back alphabetically. So for the first year, I had to only listen to Gene Ammons or Count Basie or something, so it was kind of crazy. So I started shipping them back. And so, now the whole collection's almost there. Now I have just about everything digitally, of course, but I'm real old school. I like vinyl. I have 5 turntables and I have stereos in different rooms of the house and stuff like that. So
Wow.
You know, I really like the ritual, and I think the sound is better on vinyl, which I put out my last CD on vinyl. New Journey is available as a vinyl LP. And anyway, so that's how I got started. At the same time, I got into the audio equipment. When I met this guy with the stereo gear, at the same time, I was in junior high, and my best friend at the time played clarinet. He got a buffet R13 from his uncle or something like that, who gave it to him when he passed away or something. And I was like, oh man, that's cool. And so I went and watched him play in band, and I thought it was a cool thing. So I started playing clarinet. We rented one. It was a Signet. I remember my first clarinet. It was a plastic Signet clarinet. And I had never played an instrument before. I was completely lost. I couldn't really read music. I had a couple of piano lessons before that, but clarinet, it was a really different, such a different thing. But I remember I wanted to, you know, they put me on last year, third clarinet, and he was up in first row, first chair. And I wanted to get up there, you know, so I started taking lessons with the same teacher he had. And back then, you could challenge the next person ahead of you to try to move up. So my whole goal was to try to sit next to my friend. Within about 2 weeks, I managed to challenge enough people that I got to sit next to him. So, I mean, so I took to it like right away. And so I started practicing, like I was already practicing like 3 hours a day, even within the first year I was playing.
Oh my God. Okay.
You know, and then we got into this competitive thing where he'd come to the school the next morning and say, you know, I practiced 4 hours yesterday. So then I said, yeah, I practiced 5 hours, you know, so it just got ridiculous. So it got into a thing where I started doing 8 hours a day, which turned into my routine all through high school and college, 8 hours of practice every day.
Wow.
And I started keeping practice journals, and it was really intense. And it was, but I loved it. You know, I mean, as a matter of fact, I think my parents were trying to get me to stop practicing because they thought I wasn't doing enough social things with other kids. So like any typical teenager, the more my dad would tell me to stop practicing, the more I'd practice, you know, because it was just the opposite. So like, you know, if he said, hey, looks like you need a shave, of course I'd go another 5 days without shaving because, you know, he was telling me to shave. So, you know, so, but that's my mild rebellion. You know, that was my rebellion, was practicing too much, and, you know, and I'd wait another couple of days to shave just because he said, hey, looks like you need a shave. Why don't you get, you know, he was pretty clean cut. So, that was the funny thing. Back then, my whole goal was to try to grow a beard and stuff, and I couldn't, but I had long hair. Now I'm bald up here. But I could shave this off and it'll grow back in a week, you know?
Irony.
So,
Irony.
the irony of it. What are they? Yeah. Yeah, what do they say? I watched some interesting show. This is getting off the topic here, but there was this show called Rita, which is about a high school teacher in Denmark. It's in Dutch, but it's on Netflix. It's a Netflix production, and I love it because it's about a teacher, and she cares so much about the student that she goes around all these kind of crazy rules about the system, and she goes to the kid's house and tries to counsel him and help him. And she's really, but she's a crazy wild woman, and she smokes cigarettes all the time, and she's doing all this stuff. But I was watching an episode, and she was talking with a friend of hers about all the experience she has as a teacher, that now she's old and she's not feeling that great about herself, and she's not as healthy as she was. And they said it must be a proverb in Danish or something, but it said, experience, that's like when life gives you a comb after you've gone bald. That's what experience is.
I definitely won't have a problem going bald.
No, you won't have a problem. You got funny hair. But I thought that, I mean, I'm sure it was translated in a strange way to English, because I'm sure it's like some kind of colloquialism.
That's
but
funny,
I was thinking, man, that's really deep. That's a very interesting thing. So
that's awesome.
Experiences when life hands you a comb when you've gone bald. So it's like,
well, you know, I'm just curious though. So you're practicing a lot. Your friend's practicing a lot. Did your friend pursue the path of music?
No, he didn't do it.
That's surprising.
He didn't do it. He wanted to do it. The thing is, it's a combination of things. I don't think he had the same. He had some passion for it, but he had other interests as well, and he was interested a little bit in sports, and he had other interests, whereas I was completely music 24 hours a day. Yeah. We even formed a big band back then called the Windy City Swing Band, and we actually started playing gigs at local clubs. I started, so clarinet, I was 12.
Okay.
I played for a year. I got up to first clarinet, and my last week of 8th grade, my father, as a graduation present, bought me a Mark 7. We just ordered it from the store. We ordered it from Carnes Music.
Wow.
And it was brand new. I didn't try it. I didn't know how to play the saxophone. So he just ordered one.
Wow.
And it came in, and I remember I was so excited, and it had a fingering chart, you know, and it had the C-star mouthpiece that came with it or whatever. And I took it home and started looking at the fingering chart. I brought the horn. It was in one of those enormous tri-pack cases.
Oh,
you know, I had to take it on the bus, you know, to school the next day, you know, and everyone's like, oh my God, that case is so big. And I brought it, and I watched the jazz band play, and the director let me sit next to the tenor player, and I remember they were playing In the Mood, and I started trying to play along. And I had been playing for about, you know, a day or two, and I was able to keep up. Of course, after playing clarinet for a year,
yeah,
it was no big deal to try to, you know, this thing was much more friendly. So I was like, oh man, this is great. There's no holes, you know, it's like, you know, and it's like an octave key. It's actually the same note, you know, when I play and I finger a B, I press the key and it's up, it's another B. It's great.
Yes,
so,
yes.
So the director put me on the concert. So I'd only been playing for about a week, and I got to play the final jazz band concert with my junior high band.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun. And I just took to it really naturally. I just loved it immediately. And the teacher I was with at the time, a guy named Rick Schuck, who was, he wasn't the greatest jazz player, but he played a lot of like kind of, you know, he played like society gigs and things like that where he needed to know a lot of standards. So when I was 13 and I started playing sax, he said, look, you're going to need to know Moonlight in Vermont and Girl from Ipanema and, you know, Misty. And as time goes by, you're going to have to know these standard tunes, Autumn Leaves. And he had me memorize them, and we'd play them together. So by the time I was 14, I had probably memorized about 50 melodies of those famous standards. And even though I didn't know my chords yet, I was playing with groups where I could play the melody, and we would just sort of play off of the melody. We'd paraphrase it a little bit. And I remember he had me, my first gig, he had me at a very famous place in Chicago called the Empire Room, which is downtown Chicago. And it was a big deal for me to even go there. And I remember I was so excited. Now they were there and they were playing, it was some kind of corporate function or something, and they were playing dinner music up front. And I had just gotten a tuxedo, because back then everyone wore tuxedos. So here I am, like a 15-year-old kid, you know, I'm wearing a tuxedo. And I find the room, you know, where the band is playing, and I look in the door and I see everyone's there in their tuxedos. So I walk in and I see they're on a break. So I go up to him and I shake hands with him. I try to shake hands with him. He says, never shake hands on the bandstand. So I was like, you know, he says, the client thinks that we've been playing together for a long time, and if you walk in and shake my hand, they're going to think that you just met me or something like that. And so I gave me a real hard time about that, but I was so naive, you know. Now, I had sat in before with them. They played at a couple of bars with a big band that they had, and my dad had to go with me to get me in. I was about 14. And at the time, I remember this, I was recording. I was really fascinated by the sound of a saxophone section. I had just discovered Four Brothers with the three tenors, the three tenor parts. Okay. And I got my band director in high school. This was my freshman year of high school. I got him to let me take home those parts. And back then I had two blasters, two recorders, like two boom boxes. So I'd record one part in boombox A, and then I'd stand next to it and I'd play the other part, and I'd record that on boombox B. And then I'd stand next to this one, and I'd go back and forth. So I recorded all the tenor parts for Four Brothers. And when I went to this club that doesn't exist anymore, it was some bar in a suburb of Chicago, and Sullivan's. It was called Sullivan's. It was in Niles, Illinois. And I went and I brought one of the blasters, and I had the cassette with me playing Four Brothers. So I remember I went in there and I said, "Hey, check out what I just did!" And it was me playing all three parts of Four Brothers. And so like all those guys in the band were completely flipping out, because like no one told me to do this. This was just something I did for fun because I thought it was cool. And it was sort of my way of combining my love of like audio gear and music. And so I would do stuff. I always used whatever technology was available at the time, because I realized right away when I was playing those parts, like for all the songs for jazz band, I wanted to play all the sax parts so I could hear it in my head when I was playing the tenor part, that I could hear both the alto parts. So I would take all five parts and I would overdub all of them myself, so that when I play a solo, like I remember we were working on Hey Burner was one we worked on, and A Warm Breeze. My guy was really into Sammy Nestico tunes. So I had played all five parts of those solis and recorded them myself and overdubbed them. Wow. And so when I would play lead tenor, I could really hear the chords, and it was really early training for hearing voice leading, for hearing chord progressions. I didn't know it at the time. For me, it was just something fun that I liked to do. But that was just an early way that I used to practice. So it wasn't like I was trying to even put in 8 hours a day. It was just like my obsession. I just loved it. And so I just started listening to lots of records. And then that's how I kind of got into Stan Getz. When I was 12 or 13. That first teacher, he gave me some of his albums. And one, like, he had Super Sax, he had Dexter Gordon, he had Stan Getz, he had Maynard Ferguson, big band, like the early 60s stuff. And Stan Getz and Charlie Parker. But the Stan Getz one, there's something about his sound and his melodic way of playing that kind of caught me. And when I heard Getz with the Oscar Peterson Trio when I was about 13, and immediately started trying to figure out what he was doing. I remember being in my mom's kitchen and trying to play along and just trying. I couldn't notate yet, but I would just write the notes with letter names on a piece of paper.
Got it, yeah.
Draw arrows if they're going up or down.
Wow.
And eventually, like many years later, I transcribed every note on the whole album and ended up transcribing that whole record. And I used to play with the whole record as a warm-up. That'd be my 1 hour warm-up. I would just play with Stan and Oscar, and I'd put the speakers on each side of me like a giant pair of headphones. So I'd have the left and right speaker pointing at me, and I would just stand in the middle and play so I could feel what it was like to have Ray Brown and Oscar Peterson and Herb Ellis, you know. Wow. So, I mean, those things were just so fun. At one point, I would transcribe. Stan would do these videos sometimes, and I would memorize a solo that he played on the video, and I would play it along with the video by memory so I could be like part of it. Like, so then when they cut to the drummer and I see him reacting to what's being played, like I'm playing the same solo Stan's playing. So I'm watching these guys react. I'm watching the piano player react to something that was just played, and I'm doing it. So by then I was probably 20, you know, but it was very interesting. I somehow learned early on that the record thing, if you got to go to the source. I tell you where I realized that. There was a guy I studied with, a famous guy in Chicago named Joe Daley. When I was 16, I studied with him, and I had been with that first teacher. I was like his best student at the time, and I think what he was doing, looking back, he was using me to recruit other students because I was doing really well, you know. And he should have sent me on to somebody else 2 years before he did, but I was with him for about 3 years, and the second 2 years was just basically we'd sight read duets together, and we'd have a good time. But it wasn't really challenging me to do anything. And then I went to a jam session at this kid's house, Gary Novak, who's a famous drummer now.
Yeah.
Famous LA guy, but his father named Larry Novak, who was a wonderful pianist. And I went to his house and for this jam session, and his father heard me and said, "You're ready for this guy, Joe Daley. You should go to him for lessons." So I contacted Joe, and I was one of his youngest students, and Joe was one of the toughest teachers. He taught Sanborn, and he taught John Clemmer, were two of his famous students. Wow. But he was a legendary Chicago player and teacher, and he was real old school, very tough. I mean, people would leave those lessons crying, like with their horn out of their case. I mean, because Joe, he was just like, you played something and it wasn't working. He'd just say, "Ain't making it, baby. Pay me and get out." And you just take your stuff and leave.
Wow. Oh my God.
I mean, he was so tough, you know. And it was like a unfinished basement, and there'd be like a bare light bulb hanging down, and he'd be like in his undershirt, and he was like in his 60s, and he was like he had white hair, and he'd sit there, you know, kind of with his head in his hands. He's listening to you. "Hey, making it, baby. Maybe get out." So, you know, Joe's thing, I remember the first day I saw him, he said, I played for him, and he said, "If you want to study with me, you have to practice 5 hours a day minimum on just what I give you." I said, "Okay." I was already practicing like 8 hours a day. And then he started telling me, "Every week we're going to do 3 standards in 12 keys. You have to do them by ear. Don't write them out. When you come to the lesson, I'll say, 'Okay, what was your tune this week? Wave? Okay, let me hear it in F sharp. You play the melody, and then I want you to solo 2 courses on it, unaccompanied.'" I said, "What do I do with all my play-along records at home?" He said, "Throw them in the garbage, kid."
Wow.
He said, "You need to be able to play these changes with nothing behind you. You need to be able to keep the time yourself." Now, Joe had very extreme opinions on everything. So, you know, you got to take some of what he said with a grain of salt, because I found later on that those play-along things can be great tools, and you can use them properly, and they're beneficial. Where people don't use them properly is where they're just sort of playing over it, and they still don't know the changes themselves without the record. Like, to me, to use those play-alongs, including my play-alongs on my book, the reason to use them and the way to use them properly is to act like you have to be interactive with what's going on. So you have to be actively listening while you're soloing, not just playing over it, but leaving space, and you hear, oh, the piano's comping here. I'm going to leave room for him to comp, and then maybe I'll take one of his comping rhythms or one of his ideas in the fill, and I'll use that in my solo. So, and I've done this in the studio where someone calls me for a project and like they need sax solos, but the album's already recorded, and it has to sound like I was there improvising at the time, you know. And I'm really good at that because I can hear what the rhythm section is doing and incorporate those things into my solo in real time as it's happening. So I got to be really good at that. And that is a benefit from working with those play-alongs. But Joe's point was well taken, and I listened to him, and if you were playing, you'd play a solo, and you'd finish, and he'd say, the 13th measure had a flat 9 on that chord. I never heard you hit a flat 9 in your solo. I mean, he was incredibly specific, you know.
Yeah, wow.
And so it was really good, you know. But Joe wasn't the most communicative teacher. He would tell me, I want you to be able to do this next week, these tunes and these keys. And he'd say, also, every week, you had to either play a Coltrane solo, Charlie Parker solo, or Sonny Rollins solo. And he would give you the transcription, but you could transcribe it yourself if you wanted to. As he'd say, learn these tunes and these keys. I want you to be able to play Blue Train or whatever the solo was, or Giant Steps, these famous solos. And there were these other things too. He would say, I want you to come next week, and I want you to be able to play in a convincing manner and portray a mood. I want you to portray a mood of sadness in your playing, or a mood of happiness, or a funky mood, like a dirty kind of mood, or a kind of mischievous kind of feeling. And I had to come up with whatever song I was going to use for it. And I would play, and I would try to come up with some kind of emotional feeling. And he would say, I'm not convinced. And then I would do another time, try something else. He'd say, all right, you convinced me. That's funny, you know. And he'd say, let's see. He'd say, he would imitate people talking and say, gee, Molly, that sure is a beautiful melody. And he would say, so, Greg, I want you to be able to play something that would make this guy say, gee, Molly, wasn't that a beautiful melody? Well, what is it that makes it beautiful? What made him say it was beautiful? And it got me thinking in a very different way. But that's all he would say. And I would say, well, how do I do it? And he'd say, I don't care how you do it. There are no rules. You can steal it. You can take it from a record. You could get together with another player. He said, I don't even want you to tell me how you do it. I don't care. All I want is that you can do it when you show up next week, whatever I'm assigning.
Wow.
And so that was great, because what I started doing, he said there's no rules. So I started bringing a recorder into the lesson, and I'd have him demonstrate a bunch of stuff, and then I would go home and transcribe him and memorize his stuff.
Smart.
And so then when I'd go back and play a bunch of his stuff at him, of course, he thought it sounded great. So, but we never discussed it. He never said, hey, you just copy what I did. And I never told him I copied what he did. I just, you know, he said there's no rules. So that was great.
That's interesting, because that always, people always get stuck on the how-to. How do I do this? How do I do this? And for some people, it stops them dead in their tracks.
Right.
But in this situation, it's funny. This is very old school type of teaching, where it's like, okay, here's your assignment. Just do it. Just get it done.
Right. And if it weren't making it, you just say, hey, making it, and you got to go home and you got to do it again. Try to figure it out, you know, and hopefully this time, you know, you'll be able to do it. I remember one week, he had a set amount of things he wanted to show you, and some people were with him for 5 years or 10 years, and some people didn't make it through, and they just quit. There was some point with Joe's lessons where he says, I have showed you everything that I wanted to show you. You're ready to go on. And so I was with him about 1.5 years, which is really fast. I went through really quick with him. Yeah. But I remember I was so proud that I made it through, and he didn't kick me out as a student, and I didn't give up and quit. Because in the years after that, I teach many people who did study with Joe, some people who are older than me, who studied with him. I studied with him in 1984. I'm teaching a guy right now who studied with him in 1975, and he never made it through. And I'm showing him the stuff that he didn't get to see because he didn't make it that far with Joe. And Joe's thing was really like, it was old school, but he had a reason. Because I asked him, I think at one point toward the end of my lessons, why he was so mean to some students. And he said, look, it is very tough out there to make it playing. And if they can't make it through with me, they're not prepared to make it in the real world playing. And they're better off finding out now that they should do something else, and they should just do this for fun. He said, I assume if you're with me, you want to do this full time as a professional player. And I'm treating you like a professional. If you can't take it, he said, it's really, really tough out there. And if you can't even make it through with me criticizing you and through these lessons, then you should just do something else, you know. So it was real sink or swim with him. If you could make it through with him, you had a chance. If you couldn't make it through with him, You should do something else, is what he thought.
Wow.
Now, if I had that approach, I would lose 90% of my students, because a lot of people are just what I call recreational players. They're adults who have families and businesses, and they want to play great, but they don't want to take 8 hours a day and give up their job and, and actually live the lifestyle of working musician, which is really tough, especially if you're trying to support a family.
Yeah.
So I think there is room for everything. One of the things that I think is unique is that I give access of this high level information to people who are just either beginners or intermediate players. I teach professional players, and I teach guys who are professors at universities who study with me, who use my books, and they're interested in my teaching approach. And so I teach them, and then they teach that type of approach with my books when they work with their students. But the recreational player, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote my books. I found that some of my students, they wanted to really get into the jazz thing, and they wanted to be able to improvise. They weren't skilled enough to do what I was doing for Joe Daley, to go home and learn the Blue Train solo in a week. No, they can't do that. It's just too daunting a task. But I wanted to take the vocabulary that I learned. Now, I turned into a transcription nut. I transcribed about 650 solos. It was over 600. And so, I mean, I would sometimes transcribe 8 solos a day. I would just sit there all day transcribing. I loved it. We had a big pool table in the basement of my house where I practiced. And at the beginning of the day, in the morning, we'd start out with the pool table, and I'd write out a solo, and then I'd push it back, and then I'd write out another solo. And by the end of the day, that whole 8-foot pool table had, 2 or 3 pages of transcription taped together for the whole length of the thing. And then I had to learn how to actually play the solos, and I'd play along with the record, But I got into transcribing, and I started, I called it cracking the code. I would try to figure out what these guys were doing. And the hardest thing for me at the time was figuring out the chords. Now, Joe Daley was good with the chords. I'll never forget this. He wanted me to play the chords, and he liked you to play them chromatically. And I was having trouble with half diminished chords. And one week, now I was a pretty good reader, so I wrote them out because I was so frustrated with them. And I wrote them out, and he was so mad. I remember it's one of the only times he ever actually screamed at me. He said, "I told you to do these by ear." He said, "I know you know how to read them." He says, "You're defeating the purpose of the assignment if you're reading them." He said, "This means you still can't hear them." He says, "I want you to do it by the sound of it." And so I never wrote them out again. But I remember at the time I was kind of upset, but I see his point. I wasn't hearing them. He was right. I wasn't hearing those structures. And later on, he used to call them incomplete ninths, which didn't make, and he would never explain it. But what I know now, I have a whole system I call the brick system, which there's going to be a book coming out on that. It's one of my books in the works. And what he meant was, if you have a half diminished chord, like say you've got, we'll make it a simple one, E half diminished, E, G, B flat, D. He said it's an incomplete ninth, which meant that you play that over a C dominant 7 chord, and E is the 3rd, G is the 5th, B flat's the 7th, and D is the 9th. But he would never say that. He just kept saying, "Okay, those are your incomplete ninths." And I like, "What do you mean? They sound like half diminished chords to me." But he said, "They're incomplete ninths," no explanation, But eventually, I think it was a few years later, I was sitting in a practice room, and and I said, I see what he meant. I see what he means. They're incomplete because they're ninth chords without the roots.
Right.
That's what they are. What I learned later on, I ended up calling them, I call them bricks, because it's like bricks in a wall where you're stacking chords on top of each other. So I call that E half diminished, I call it a level 1 brick. And I call what he was calling an incomplete ninth, I call it a level 2 brick. A level 2 brick is 3, 5, 7, 9 of a chord.
Got it.
Okay, right? So level 3 would be 5, 7, 9, 11. Right? Level 4 would be 7, 9, 11, 13. So like that half diminished shape, I started to notice when I was transcribing Charlie Parker, he uses it in what I call a level 4, which is a very advanced usage. He'll put that E half diminished over a F sharp 7. So the E is 7, the G is flat 9, the B flat, which is like an A sharp, that's 3, and then the top note is the sharp 5. The D is the sharp 5, or C double sharp. So a really cool sounding thing. So, as long as I got the horn sitting here, I'll let you hear what that sounds like. So in the beginning, you hear it like, you're hearing that root. But then what Joe Daley was talking about, you're hearing it like that. But Charlie Parker, so it's a whole different way to hear it. So it's like, wow. So I'm hearing it different now. So what I started doing was connecting these bricks together. See, so what I just did, and it ends up being what I call wholesale voice leading. Okay, I'm glad we're getting this on film, because I need to copyright all this stuff, because it took years to come up with these labels for it. So now here it is. Here is the proof, because I've been teaching this for years to people. This isn't a book that's coming out probably next year. We're working on an interval book right now. The chord book with the bricks is coming out probably end of this year, beginning of next year. But what I'm doing, most people would know that as a D major 7 chord. Okay, yeah. What I'm doing is treating it as a level 2 brick over B minor. So it's 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, I'm putting it as 3, 5, 7, 9 over B minor. So, which is really cool, because I show this to students and I say, you know, you learned your major 7 chords. You don't have to just play those over a major 7 chord in a song. You can play them over any minor 7 chord and it will act as 3, 5, 7, 9. It sounds really cool, you know. And I didn't know this at the time, but I even remember when I was a kid, when I was playing with the Abrasols, which I didn't throw in the garbage like Joe recommended, but I remember playing them, and I remember playing, I was doing this same kind of thing, and I would, if the chord symbol said B minor 7, I have in my pencil, I wrote D major 7 just because I thought it sounded cool over it. I didn't know at the time that it was 3, 5, 7, 9. I just knew it sounded good. And at the time, I thought it was chord substitution, but it's not. It's just upper extensions of the given chord. So it's not substituting, but anyway, so what I was doing here, so what you get is voice leading times 4, because I've got 2 bricks next to each other. Because of this, the E resolves to the D, right? That's the root of each of the bricks, right?
Right.
There's the third of each of the bricks. And so you get, you add the roots to those. You got, and it sounds very complete. It's basically like a piano voicing. It's like a piano player would do, right? And you can just go, you could take any note of the bricks. You don't have to even do all 4. You could just do 1 and you have a nice voice leading line, or you can take any 2 of them. Or you can go. You know, all that stuff, it all sounds great. Here's the root. The root is a very important note. A lot of people, beginning players, are told by well-meaning, I'm sure, well-meaning educators, don't play the root. Avoid the root. It's not a hip note. The root is essential. You have to hear the root. If you're not hearing the root in your head, if you're not hearing this, then this means nothing. You have to hear it as the flat 9, and it's only a flat 9 if you're hearing it as a minor 9th above the root. If you're only hearing it, or not even hearing it, if you're only thinking of it as a note in a scale that someone told you to play, you're in big trouble. You'll never sound good, because you've stripped away the harmonic identity of the notes. Like when someone says, this is a kind of a controversial thing, because a lot of people teach with scales. They teach, you look at this chord, you play this scale. I'm not like that. It's chords. They're all chord tones. All the scale notes are chord tones to me. And so basically, here's the scale and here's the chord. And so, you know, and you need to be able to play very specifically. You have to hear the sound of the note you want, and you have to hear it in harmonic context when you hear a note. So, you know, if you're going to hear that D at the top, you got to hear da. If you're hearing that D as the sharp 5 or the flat 13, you got to hear ba, 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 ba. I can't sing that. Ba, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, boo, da, ba, da. Boo, doo, dee, dee, da, boo, doo, be, da. Boo, doo, ba, doo, ba, doo, ba, doo, da. Ba, ba, da, boo, doo, boo, dee, da. Da, doo, be, ba, dee, da. Boo, da, ba, da. Boo, boo, dee, boo, da. Boo, boo, da, doo, da. Ba, da, ba, da, da, da. started training myself to what I realized. This was just, a lot of this just came from like 8 hours a day for 12 years. This is the stuff you learn, you know, with a lot of experimentation. I realized that the job of the fingers is to locate the sound you're hearing in your head.
Yes.
That's the job. So it's not just to play fast. You got a lot of people who are practicing the saxophone, and they're taught for 10 years. All they do is practice their reading, first of all. So it's just eye to hand coordination. And they're not hearing anything. It's just their eye looks at the dot on the page, their finger responds to the dot, and their ear is left out of it. And so to me, that's really, you know, that's sort of using the saxophone just like it's like data entry or something like that. Like, okay, the person's entering a bunch of data in a typewriter. They're really fast typing, but then they have no comprehension of what it is or what it means. Like they can't, all they can do is look at it and then type it. But if you say, well, what does that mean? I don't know. I just type it. I can type it 100 words a minute. Like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you know what's interesting about this also too, because this is so striking, and just the example of you just playing that is the way I was taught in college. I played trumpet also, and Vince Panzarella would make me sing everything, and no one ever told me to do that before, and I had to sing it in fixed-do, and that was his training. You know, if you can't hear it in your head, you can't play it.
That's right. I agree.
And you
right, you shouldn't be. I mean, it's lying to me. It's musically lying. If you're playing stuff you're not hearing, I play what I hear. If I'm not hearing it, I don't play it. So
yeah, I think also. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think also,
go ahead.
What you were saying too. You know, I think one of the main reasons why people are so into the reading, it's because it's been drilled into people's heads that you're not literate in music unless you read.
Right.
And that's how people are taught in schools. It's read and play at the same time, and that's
right.
where I think part of that's coming from.
Right, that's true. And you know, it's like my wife, Judy Roberts, a world-class pianist. She recorded with Ray Brown and you know, and Jeff Hamilton, and she doesn't read. You know, she's not a reader. She's self-taught. She doesn't even know any theory. She doesn't know, if I asked her to play an F-sharp scale, she wouldn't know what to do. She knows about 5,000 songs by memory. She can play them in any key. And we play all the time, and you've seen videos probably of me playing with her. I mean, we just posted one of, we were doing Cherokee at some gig. Customer requested Cherokee, and he happened to film part of it. And, you know, she's the best accompanist. She's my favorite piano player, you know. And I mean, her voicings, you know, and it was so good. I had to marry her. She was so good.
I said, you better say she's your favorite accompanist.
She is. It's true. It is true. Judy, she's amazing. She knows no rules. So she just hears so naturally that everything works. Everything makes perfect sense. She's like, it's funny. We could be in a recording studio in a mixing session, and we can't hear what's wrong. We're like, everyone's listening to this thing. We're like, something is wrong with this track. What is it? And she'll walk in the door and she'll hear it the first time and she'll say, oh, there's a bad note in the piano voicing in third measure. You know, and it's like, damn, you're right. I mean, she's like harmonically like the Princess and the Pea. I mean, she's like the harmonic version of that.
That's hearing. That's absolutely hearing it.
She's unbelievable with that. Or he said anyway. So, and she doesn't read. You know, so she learns stuff by ear. And she says she can read minimally, but she says the reason she can remember all these tunes is because she learned them naturally by listening to Ella Fitzgerald or Sarah Vaughan, listening to them sing and singing along, and then memorizing it, not writing it out. And the few tunes that she did learn in her life where she had to learn it off a piece of paper, she doesn't remember them. And, you know, and so I remember once I was teaching she was a classical flutist who was starting to play some jazz, and she had been playing some simple melodies, which she was trying to do Morning of the Carnival, Black Orpheus, and she'd been reading it for 10 years. And I was trying to teach it to her by ear, but it was like she had never played the song before, even though she'd been playing the music for 10 years. And so that's not good. I mean, you gotta be, I'll tell you another thing, that a lot of things happened that kind of led me to all of these conclusions and this approach to looking at things. I was playing this thing called Italian Fest, and it's like where they have all these Italian entertainers and singers. It was in Chicago. I was a teenager, and I was like the youngest guy in the band, and it was a whole big band, and they had a conductor and stuff, and we had sight reading. They were kind of hard parts, but I was pretty good at reading. And during one of the breaks, it was sort of like a picnic family kind of thing. And so a father with his young kids, it was a kid's birthday party or something, and they're singing happy birthday or something like that. And he said, hey, why don't you play along with the kids while they're singing? And I was like, I was so embarrassed. I couldn't do it. I was like, hearing them, I couldn't just come in because I couldn't tell what note they were on or starting on, you know? And I was like, this is terrible. I remember I was feeling so stupid because I think I was a senior in high school. I was first in the state. And at the time, meant so much. Now looking back on it, it doesn't really mean anything. But at the time, I was first in the state. We had the all-state audition, and I went first in district, and then we went downstate. And I made first in the state, you know, and it was a great honor and all that.
Yeah.
But this was after that, just after that, before college. And I was thinking, man, what a hoax I am. I can't even play Happy Birthday along with a 5-year-old kid who's singing it. And I'm up here sight reading all this hard music. Something is wrong, you know, and I can even play, you know, at that point I could play along with the Coltrane record and I was, you know, those solos, and I even memorized some of them. But the fact that my ear wasn't good enough that I could just hear someone sing something and immediately just match it, like there's a problem. And so I started really working on that part of it. And that's where I started getting into the thing, well, I have to feel it in my hand. So when I hear the sound of it, see if I'm still right. Yeah. Now on alto, it's C sharp. On tenor, it's on flute, it's and I play electric bass a little bit too. I know where it is on the bass, you know, and on piano. So each one has a different location. This is one of the reasons it's very difficult to switch between alto and tenor. It's because of your ear, because it messes your mind up with the locations. You have to stay very clear because you can get confused, because if there's 2 different locations for this sound, you're gonna have issues. So Joe Daley was right when I first started studying with him. He said, what do you play, alto or tenor? I said, oh, I play alto, soprano, bari. I play them all. He says, you need to pick one because you need to specialize. He said, Sonny Rollins is a tenor player. Cannonball Adderley, he's an alto player. What are you? You know, I said, okay, I'm a tenor player. Yeah, most of my favorite players were tenor players. I actually have more facility on alto, you know, but I think tenor is a harder horn in general, just for the intervals, the skips and stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's my main horn that I'm not as critical on alto. But anyway, so I was a tenor player. But he didn't express it like that, but he just said you have to specialize in one or the other. Sonny Stitt's about the only guy who's equally good, equally great on alto and on tenor. James Moody was another guy who was also pretty equal. But most people that I've met, they're better on one than the other. I actually enjoy the alto. I like them both. I still think of myself as a tenor player because I hear natively in B flat. So when I'm playing alto, it's running through my tenor filter.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, because that's interesting for me because I'm B flat predominantly. And are you thinking in concert pitch or are you thinking in B flat pitch? And
no, it's B flat pitch. It's my pitch. I studied with Joe Henderson, and Joe thought in concert pitch all the time.
Okay.
You know, but I don't, when I'm on piano, I think in concert pitch. I think in whatever the name of the key is, whatever it is for the instrument I'm playing. And I've worked so much on playing in 12 keys, it kind of doesn't really matter to me as far as if it's the key signature of B or key signature of A or whatever. I'm good with that. You know, but as far as just the raw sound, the whole thing is about the location of the sound.
Right.
And I'll give you something I figured out. I don't know why. And I had taken off the clarinet because I have problems with all that practicing. One of the prices I paid, TMJ. And I was playing a setup that was, even though it sounded good, it was completely wrong for me. And I was playing an 8 mouthpiece with a 4 reed on it. And just biting the hell out of the thing, you know, because what I didn't realize was physically, I'm just not set up to play a mouthpiece that big. And now, you know, I'm playing a 5. This is measured 90. This is 0.90. This is my old stubby Dukoff from like the late 40s. And I usually play a 5 or 6 now. But back then, I was playing a really heavy reed, and I was biting, you know, so you get these big teeth marks in the top. And I was basically biting what was an 8 down to probably a 5 with pressure from my jaw and not using proper air support to make the reed go. So the way you really have to play is the air support has to be so good and strong that the reed will vibrate while it's freely floating with no pressure on it. Okay. So now I play with no pressure on the reed, and people always like, they hear me play and they're like, oh man, you got such a powerful big sound. You must be playing a huge piece. I'm like, it's a 5 with a 2 hard reed on it. You know, it's a very light setup, but it became out of necessity because I started getting pain. One day I played with the Woody Herman Band for 2 years. when they come to the Midwest, and I was their second tenor player. And I remember we were on a tour in like Ohio or something, and before the gig, I was eating something for lunch, and I opened my mouth to eat a hamburger, and it locked open.
Oh, God.
And I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? Fortunately, I was able to just kind of manipulate it, and I got it to jump back into place. And I played, but it started getting worse. And I went to a couple of doctors, and they did that thing where it goes around your head and they take all these x-rays, and they said, they don't recommend surgery. They said a lot of times people with surgery come out worse than they were to start with. So they said, you're putting a lot of pressure on it. They said, take some time off. That's how I started playing the bass. That was 1994.
Oh, okay, got it.
And so I couldn't keep practicing 8 hours a day. So I took about 6 months where I just switched to practicing piano and bass. And I would only play sax on gigs where I had to play it. And when I came back to practicing, I changed everything. And I went down to a number 6 mouthpiece with like a number 2 reed. And I had to kind of relearn how to blow and support the air from down here and not to bite. And, the thing about the neck, if you play just the neck, there's a pitch. That's the pitch, actually. It's the
right.
Right. Yep. Back then, I was playing so tight, I don't want to hurt my jaw now, but it was probably a half step or a whole step even higher because I was playing so tight. So with students, one of the things if I'm hearing someone play the first time, I say, just play the neck with the pressure you're playing with, and if they're pinching, you're getting that kind of, and you get the shaking, that's all because of these little muscles. They're not designed to handle that much pressure. You need to support it with the air. And even get softer, maybe play it and then even more control if you get soft.
And keep the same pitch,
and you should be standing too. Sitting is not good for this. But anyway, you should just get used to hitting that note and then you put it on the horn and say, And now on alto, it's different. On alto, it's your F.
That's right, yeah.
On tenor, it's your F sharp. But you should be around that pitch, and I wasn't. And so it went, even though I had some excellent teachers, it went undetected because I sounded good and I was playing in tune, but I was really hurting my jaw because I was playing a setup that was too big for me and a reed that was too heavy for me. And so to me, the mouthpiece size is like your shoe size. Just because my buddy wears a size 14 shoe doesn't mean that I should go out and buy a pair of 14s,
That's right.
It's got to be right for you. I have a friend who does play a 9 mouthpiece, and he's a big guy, and he's got this strong jaw, and it's no problem for him. But for me, I would injure myself with that setup. So it just has to be the right setup for you. I've played other guys, some people like really, really resistant setups. I don't. I like a little bit of resistance, but not too much, because again, it puts too much back pressure, for me. So now for some people, it doesn't bother them. Now I played trumpet. I studied trumpet for about a year and was doing really well. But again, the back pressure, it was bothering this TMJ thing like crazy. And I had to just give it up because it was like my trumpet teacher's like, you're going to mess up your sax playing if you keep doing this. It's like, cause I was playing and it was starting to get aggravated again. It had been kind of dormant for a while. And then after playing the trumpet, and like anything, I'm really an all in or all out person. I was practicing trumpet like 4 hours, 5 hours a day.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
In short spurts, because, your lip just gets tired, but I would do a half hour and then I'd do something else. And I'd come back and do another 20 minutes. And by the end of the day, I liked the trumpet. It was fun, but it was just starting to interfere with my jaw. And so I gave it up, but I wanted to learn it because I have some trumpet students who come to me for improv. At that time, especially, I had 3 trumpet students, and I wanted to be able to relate things to them in terms they could understand and knowing what they'd have to do fingering wise. So I wanted to be able to, which I could do. I could play a Chet Baker solo or, something if it wasn't too high. And I could solo. So we both play, and the play along, and we'd play Satin Dow or something. And I could play the trumpet and I could solo and have them imitate my trumpet solo. And,
awesome.
What I learned also by doing this with the trumpet, I wanted to try, I'd never played the trumpet before. I knew nothing at all about it. And I wanted to try, once I learned basically how to play from the teacher, who was a classical trumpet teacher, I wanted to try my own teaching method for improv on myself to see how it would work, as far as finding the location of the sounds and things I tried transcribing, Chet Baker or Miles Davis or, trumpet guys, Art Farmer. Yeah. And I started to get together sort of idiomatic trumpet licks that felt good, that were easy to execute. And the thing I learned on the trumpet that I didn't know before was it's the opposite of the saxophone, where on the saxophone, it's hard to do descending intervals, big skips. On the trumpet, it's hard to do ascending intervals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
You can to slur upward on a saxophone is super easy. To slur downward on a sax is hard.
Yes.
But it's the reverse for trumpet.
Yeah, that's why we do all those.
If you're on a high note and you want to just do a lip slur down, that's no problem. You want to do a lip slur up, it's really hard.
Yep, that's like the harmonic. It's funny because with saxophones, you deal a lot of times, if you want to get into the altissimo, you deal with overtone exercises,
right.
Harmonics. I'm used to that as a trumpet player, sort of like, open valve. So going up the sequence, and that is right. Definitely challenging. But what's interesting, what you're saying to me, and to equate this too for people that may be playing trumpet that are listening, the thing that you don't want to do as a trumpet player, you don't want to focus on pinching the aperture. And that's the
right.
space, that's a hole that opens when you blow. And that's the equivalent of the saxophone biting right.
with
the bottom teeth and biting on the top. So it's the same kind of principle where we both have to focus on the corners and the breath support.
right.
And if you focus on the center, that's where all the problems happen.
True. It's exactly right. Yeah. Any pressure, when I've played with great trumpeters, it looks like almost no effort. It just looks like they're just holding it up to their face. All this stuff's coming out. And when, guys who are struggling, they pull the horn away and you can see it's like a big round, circle around the center of their lips.
That's right. That's exactly it.
And I even remember just from trumpet, when I would get tired, of course, I'd press harder to try to get it to work, and then before you know it, nothing works.
That's right. And then the next day you want to play again and your lips are all puffy and it's
right. Yeah, it's the whole thing. So it's good that I went through that training. So
yeah, definitely.
So that I could do it, but I was able to. I even took the trumpet out on a few gigs at one point. I mean, it was getting pretty good. So that was fun. What was way easier? Flugelhorns. I ended up getting a flugelhorn because it was so much less pressure.
Yes, that's a nice sound, beautiful sound.
And it's a nice sound. And cornet is really easy. I tried a cornet once. That's way easier.
Yes, it is.
The trumpet is the hardest of them. But anyway, so that was cool. I learned something about playing a brass instrument, and a lot of the fingerings were kind of similar, actually. Like the A, two valves is like the A on our left hand, but it was my right hand.
I know, and sometimes because I still play both, and it's like I'm playing the saxophone, and it's like C, second finger. No, C's open. No, it's not. It's second finger on the saxophone, where trumpet it's open.
Right, but like your F sharp on the trumpet, it's like this. Yep. It's the same as your F sharp on the saxophone, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. So yeah, there is some similarities with that. I was just thinking to myself, though, let me ask you this question before I forget. So you've transcribed all these types of things, and you had mentioned the pool table and putting out and stuff. Okay. When you were transcribing at that point, you had said something that you had to learn how to play them. Are you saying that you transcribe just by ear first?
No, at first I used the horn, and I would do it with the horn, which is very important because that actually, I didn't know it at the time, but that was teaching me this thing about the location of the sound, because I would hear the guy play it, I have to find it. And it's over and over again. But one day, after enough years of doing this, I got where I heard the thing, and I was like, I know what note this guy's playing. I just started writing it. I tried the whole solo without the horn. And it was like magic. I was like, I did it, and it was right. And I was like, and then I was worried I was going to lose it, so I'd go to sleep, and the next day I wouldn't be able to do it again. But it stuck. It stuck pretty well. I mean, I won't say 100%, but about 98% accurate as far as hearing it. Especially if it was a guy I was familiar with. If it was Sonny Stitt, my two main guys I transcribed were Sonny Stitt and Stan Getz. After that, I did a lot of Coltrane stuff, a fair amount of Charlie Parker stuff. I did a lot of Lester Young stuff. I did Don Byas and Zeus Sims and Brecker, and I did everybody, but the main ones were Stitt and Getz. Those were my two main guys that I love. So it got to where I was so familiar. One of the keys to learning this thing, of identifying the notes, it is you have to memorize not just the pitch, but the timbre of the note. It's recognizing the sound of the note on the saxophone. So recognizing that a D is thick and the C sharp is thin and light. And I got to that gave me an extra clue when I'd be listening, and I'd be listening for the density. And eventually it got where I could tell that the guy was playing this D, not this one. Or maybe if it's Gene Ammons, he's playing this, like the big one, what I call the big D, with the regular fingering of D plus the palm key, which makes it huge. So this is like, I call it the Gene Ammons D because on his famous recording of Canadian Sunset, he goes, so he's basically going like this, this is how I teach dynamics, by the way. This is my dynamic thing.
And if those of you that are listening on the podcast, he's pushing his
Yeah,
mouthpiece
I'm
cap
pushing the
right into
mouthpiece
the
cap
camera,
suddenly in the camera, right in the face of the camera here.
knocking
So
me out.
So the light D, what I started learning was that these guys on the recordings, they're such masters that they're not just picking what note to play, but they're concerned about the timbre of each note they're playing as well. So Getz might play, and he's keeping the D with the palm key. Now listen if I play that with the regular D, and how it jumps out, it doesn't match the line. Versus is much nicer match.
Yeah.
So what I learned was it's a way of matching registers, and basically it has to match the upcoming note in the line. So if you're going to go, I'll use the regular one because it's going to match the character of the F sharp coming up that I played after the D. But if I'm going to go down, that's going to match the B better because it's lighter. Then you got guys like Coltrane who are purposely trying to not match the register, and he wants the D to jump out. So he'll play the big D in the middle of a moving line. See, so it jumps out really fast. You know,
Yeah.
so most people are playing, they're going to go. Now it's just lost. It's just an anonymous note in a line. But Coltrane, it's like jumping out at you. So
Yeah,
Coltrane, he goes. I used to go, but he doesn't do that. He goes.
Oh, yeah.
Keep the palm key open, and then
Yeah.
you jump down to the big D. Is way different than.
Yeah, and hopefully the podcast people can hear this difference. I certainly can. That's so interesting.
So it's this texture thing, and then you got guys like Sonny Stitt throwing. You know, and Lockjaw Davis, and those kind of players. It's sort of a combination of false fingerings, and it's this nice blending of these. You're alternating the textures, you know, the timbre. And that all goes back to Lester Young, who was a real pioneer of these what are called false fingerings. Like Lester Young would go, you know, even the B flat. Dexter Gordon, he likes doing that. He plays like a biz B flat, and your right hand you add 1, 2, 3 E flat, and you get this. It's really thick B flat like that.
Wow.
Okay, so when you do, Sonny Stitt does that a lot too. So you go like this. I'm using my right hand while I'm playing the biz key. Versus, that's just regular. Listen how fat the B flat is when I add the right hand. See, even down there, I would use it. Sonny Stitt, I heard him do that on a record. He doesn't just go. He goes.
Wow.
It's got this extra depth to it. So through all this transcribing, and this gets into a thing I tell all my students, that it's all ear training. Everything you do should be ear training. The ear has to be actively involved the whole time. It doesn't matter if you're practicing long tones or scales or chords, intervals. The whole time you're playing, you basically have to have these. You got to have 6 items going at once. Okay. This is what I figured out after all these years. The professional player has 6 things going simultaneously. The amateur player only has 1 or 2. Okay, and here they are in order of acquisition. The first thing, and I'll demonstrate it. So a young student or a beginning student, because they could be any age. They could be a beginner who's 50. So, but it's all. Here's the thing that's weird about the music too. It doesn't matter what age you are. You go through the same stages of development as a player, whether you're starting at 30, 50, or 10. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And like you have to go through this stage of wherever a student is, and they come to me. I'm like, at some point, I played where you are. I was at your location, and you're playing at some point. The thing is with the music is it's not linear. Like it doesn't take 10 years to get through the teenage years with music. It could take 1 year, but it could take 25 years. Everyone progresses at a different speed.
Yeah.
But in the first start, one thing that everyone has in common, you first just try to get where you can play the right notes, okay? So rhythm is not a part of it yet, so maybe they're going to try to do satin down. And they're just playing the notes, okay. Now they learn rhythm. Okay, so now you're at the amateur level or intermediate, you're getting toward intermediate level. The next thing that is acquired is articulation. Okay, after you add the articulation, you add dynamics. Okay, so now it's got that thing coming forward at you, okay? Now, after that, you add vibrato. There's a thing called terminal vibrato. Here I have a little bit of a shake. That. If I take it away, I sound like a beginner.
Yes.
Versus that little shake, that little shimmer at the end of the note, that's called a terminal vibrato. Yeah. Sometimes it's at the end of a note with a rest, like that, as you release. A rhythmic release, not just that doesn't have it. That's where you just stop. It's that little extra sound. It's like an extra syllable at the end of a word, like Japanese. Watashi wa nihongo ga skoshi wakarimasu. Anata wa?
Oh my gosh.
Anata wa nihongo? You speak any Japanese?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay, I speak a little bit.
Wow.
But because I toured over there a bunch, and I used to work for a Japanese club owner, and he would teach me. The reason I could speak some Japanese is because I learned it by ear, like I learned, like music. I took French in college for a year. I can't speak any French.
Yeah.
I can read it a little bit, and I can recognize a few words if I hear a conversation, but my pronunciation is terrible, and I'm not fluent. Japanese, I can, as soon as I said McDonald's, what desu ka? That's where's the McDonald's in Japanese. They don't say McDonald's. They can't say consonants next to each other. It's McDonald's.
Oh. Wow.
McDonald's. They can't say gold blend. It's goldo blendo. Oh. Like they always add a syllable, so they can't say flute. They say fluto.
Oh, wow.
So what I equate that to is the terminal vibrato with an extra sound at the end of a note, right? That's like fluto. That's like an extra little syllable. So, okay, we're in the list. We've got the notes. We've got the rhythm. We've got articulation. We've got dynamics. We've got the terminal vibrato. And then this next one, the sixth one, it doesn't apply to every single note, but I just call it timbral shading, which is where you are paying attention to that. So maybe I'll even do a little fall off or something like that. Just little extra details. Like even this, I'm doing the C sharp, but I had the C key 1/4 closed and then let it up to get this. I'm not doing the scoop with my jaw. The scoop with the jaw thing will make you sound like an amateur for most people. Now, unless you're Johnny Hodges, he's great at it. But a lot of people come and they're going, don't do that. Just hit them straight on. If you want that effect, though, do what Sonny Stitt does. Use a grace note from a half step below it. It sounds much cleaner. It still gives the same kind of effect. So there it is. Just the notes. The notes plus the rhythm. That plus articulation. So that dynamics added. That has the terminal vibrato. So I had a little terminal vibrato in the previous one I did too. Feel a little different. Hear that? So
that's awesome.
I'm just playing nail what I'm hearing, but I'm keeping track of a lot of different things. So this is another thing that the non-professional improviser, they can't do it. They don't keep track. They can't remember what they played 1 measure ago, or even 2, let alone like 5 measures ago. Like when I'm playing what I'm hearing, and I'm able to keep track of the themes, so I can come back to them, to refer to them. I call that a reference. This is sort of convenient because I've written like 25 books. So I have my own books out, and I make up my own terminology to describe whatever it is I want to describe. So I just make up these things like the bricks, or if you read my book called The Lobster Theory, I have all these things I call apple chords, and they wouldn't mean anything to anybody except someone who's studied with me.
Right.
But they do convey, the point I'm trying to make. They get the point across. So I use all these different things. So you need to be able to keep track of what you played. You cannot keep track of random notes in a scale. This goes back to the reason, like I was saying earlier, that I'm not a big scale guy. I practice scales all the time. I love scales, but when I'm playing, my bass is more chord based, my improvisation. It is based on the chords, lower neighbors and upper neighbors to the chord tones. Okay. But everything from 1 through 13, which is that's the same notes as the scales. But I don't think of it in terms of, like, a lot of guys, they're playing like a note set of the scale. These are the notes in the scale, and you can play any note in this group, and you're cool. I don't do it like that at all. If anything, I'm the opposite of that. It's a lot of voice leading. All my stuff, one of the reasons you can follow what I'm playing is because I'm keeping really careful track of the voice leading, of the development of the ideas. So if I'm going to go, it's because I've got this.
Yes.
And you can do all kinds of stuff. As long as you keep the line and you come back where you left off, it will make sense. So you can have all kinds of skips. The other thing, maybe I'll have a theme. There it is again. See, but this was further away. So even a 2-note theme, it just has to be something identifiable, and you have to be able to get back to it at some point. So I call that a reference. A reference is a sequence separated by more space. So other things happen, other events happen. The same is true in what I call direct and indirect voice leading. Direct voice leading is indirect. There's notes in between, but your ear is still hearing that voice leading line where it picks up.
Yes. And a lot of this stuff probably comes from, of course, not probably, comes from all those years of transcribing. I'm thinking right. Sonny Rollins in my head, because he's the master of motivic development.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So it's just, that's one of the benefits, and it's best if you can transcribe yourself. Don't go out and buy a book. I wrote 3 Stan Getz books of transcriptions for Hal Leonard, but I always tell people no one's going to get more out of those solos than I did, because I started with nothing. I just did it from scratch and just put on the record and listened and figured out what he did. Figuring out the chords took longer than figuring out the notes, I'll tell you that, because especially back then I was still just learning the chords. But to try to hear, especially to hear the bass notes, because it's really tough with jazz, because the bass player's hitting you got one beat 1 usually, and he's walking usually. So you got 1 quarter note to figure out what that root is, and then it's gone. Whereas if you're playing with a rock band, they're going da 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 da. Not all the time, but a lot of it. I mean, they're really hammering home the one, and that's it. With jazz, they're moving all over the place. This was one of the benefits of when I started studying electric bass, and I transcribed, Ron Carter lines and Ray Brown lines and all these bass players. I started doing the same thing. And the same thing I did on sax. And I started hearing, when I came back to the sax after 6 months of intense bass practice, which was also like 5-6 hours a day on the bass, then I was hearing differently. I was hearing better down there. So one of the mistakes I think people make with the sax is they don't focus on hearing the root enough. Yeah. They don't hear the root note, okay? So for example of that, like I have this new video lesson website thing. And this has been in the making for years, because I love teaching. I have private students in 12 countries. I got probably about 30 Skype students right now, which is a nice, comfortable number. But I always have more people asking me for lessons. And if I teach 5-hour lessons in a day and then go out and play a gig,
it's tiring.
That's a lot, and I'm trying to compose new tunes to do new albums, and I want to do some touring and performing. I just have a new album out with a guy named Doug Webb, great LA tenor player.
Yep, I know.
And we have a new 2-tenor thing out, and so in order to have time to do all that, what I started doing was putting a lot of the material that I teach in private lessons that I give in my master classes in video format. And it took a long time. And this took a long time to figure out how I wanted to present the material. What should I put in these videos? Should there be, PDF notes? And so it took a couple of years to get my head around how to format it, which is like all my books, like Hip Licks, took 2 years to come up with that book. It took 30 years to come up with the vocabulary to learn it. But then it took about 2 years to come up with the format of how I wanted to present the material. What licks should be first? What licks should be in there at all? I mean, there were other versions of that book, like that goes mostly chromatically, descending. I had a whole other version of the book set in cycle, not chromatic. Okay. I had another version of that book. It was a question of, well, do I write out every lick in every key, or do I do a different lick in each key? Do I do 12 licks in one key, or do I do, 12 different licks in one key, or do I do one lick in 12 different keys?
Right. Yeah.
It gets into this question I call 1 in 12 or 12 in 1. And I had versions of the book like that too. I had these things called index pages where you play lick number 4 and you could turn to an index page that would have lick number 4 transposed to all 12 keys. Ultimately, I decided against doing it like that because you should do it by ear, like Joe Daley said. So I didn't. So what I wanted to have it. Also, I didn't do it like that because I wanted to share the idiomatic. I call them native keys. I wrote them where I originally heard them. So even though I could transpose the lick, there's a certain thing, like if you're playing Charlie Parker, you've got that. Well, you could do it, but it doesn't have the same impact down there.
Yeah. And
it's because of the density of the note. It pops a certain way. So, yes, you want to play, what I realized, you want to play certain licks. You should be able to play them all in 12 keys, but you also need to have customized things that are based on the timbre and the weight of the note. And that's how Hip Licks and all my books, the etude books, the consideration is not as simple as, we'll just have voice leading and have thematic development. On top of that, it has to have the right density of notes, which is the reason why you read the same part whether you play alto or tenor, and I had the rhythm section transposed. Yeah. That's the reason. And it took me a long time before I understood, and a lot of transcription before I understood just how important that was to sound like a really great sax player. That note density information has to be a part of you. And someone who hasn't played sax very long, they don't know anything about that. They're just worried about playing the right note, but it has to be the right note in the right register at the right time. It's so customized and it's so specific. You have to really be experienced with that. So what I was telling you was, like, I was talking to you about the bass note and how important it is, and how students they are told, don't play the bass note. It's, that's like they're told not to play on beat 1. Don't play on beat 1 and don't play the bass note, or you'll sound like an amateur. Well, they don't know what to do. You can't play by means of avoidance. Means of avoidance is never a good way to play. That's like, I had a student the other day, a Skype, and he's a very brilliant guy. He's like a electrical engineer or something, and a really smart guy. And he said he figured out a way to play through this tune just using like one scale, and he just avoids the notes that clash with the chord. So he's just going to play this one scale, and when he gets to the part with the chord, I'm like, that's not how the pros do it. It's like you have to just learn all the chords, and then you have to hear the voice leading, and you have to be able to deal with each chord. It's not by means of avoidance. That would be like if I said, all right, I want you to, in the next 5 minutes we're going to talk, and I don't want any words to have the letters S or H. Go ahead, talk.
Nothing's
yeah, you can't. So now, instead of thinking about the material, the idea you want to develop, you're focused on what it is you're supposed to avoid. So like that gets into the head of students. They're like, don't play the 4th note of the major scale. Don't play the 4th. Don't play the 4th. And the thing is, then I listen to Sonny Stitt, and he's going, and I'm like, well, wait, Sonny Stitt's playing the hell out of the 4th. How come he gets to play it? And it sounds good. And yeah, it clashes with the 3rd, but it's not just that you have to resolve it. Later on, I started having this philosophy of, when he's doing that, to me, it's not just the 4th. that F. So I'm playing in the key, my key is C. So I'm going G, C, E, F. The F is not only the fourth of C, but it's the seventh of G7, which is the dominant chord. And you can always have the dominant resolving back to the one chord. So when he's laying into that F and he's going, to me, it's like he's going 5-1, 5-1, 5-1. He's just implying a 5 chord, which Bach would do all the time. He'd put a 5 chord over the 1 chord. A lot of times you put a flat 9 on the 5 chord over the 1 in the bass. So you'd have a C in the bass, and in the right hand, maybe you play a B diminished kind of shape. And then it resolves. So it works fine, but you have to hear it like that. If you're not hearing that and you're just playing because it's just another note in another scale, you'll never get that. So the pros, they put those dissonant things in there on purpose. It's by design that they do it. So I just made up, this is coming up. So the lesson site that I was telling you about, it took a long time because the web guy developing it, who's doing the actual web programming stuff, he's like, well, shouldn't you have a course where it's like a 12, here's the first lesson, and then when you accomplish that, you go to lesson number 2, and then you accomplish that, you go to lesson number 3. I'm like, it's not, on paper that sounds great. I can tell you from 30 years experience teaching, it doesn't work like that. Different people need different things at different times. Some people have a lot of technique, but their ear is not good. Other people have a great ear, but their articulation's bad. So everyone needs something different. And when I'm teaching, I listen to a person play, and I hear different aspects of what they need, and I try to give them sort of a combination that's going to help them where they're at. And I said, I need to present the stuff so that people can take what they need whenever they need it. So I call it a modular approach. So the idea is you take different parts of it from different places. So I have some videos that are ear training videos. I've got other ones that are theory videos. I've got other ones that are specifically to work on technique. Other ones are just for articulation. Other ones are for voice leading. Other ones, I'll take an etude, like State Street, or last month we did Irving Park Road from Etudes 1. And I did a 20-minute video where I analyze the piece, and I tell you about how I developed this theme, and I talk about note groupings, which is another thing a lot of people don't know about. Internal groupings of notes within an eighth note line. And it's not enough to just play the eighth notes and count it correctly. You have to really hear the groupings of the notes properly in order for the phrase to sound smooth and to sound right. So these are all in there, and I tell people, we have it set up where you can just look down a whole list of all of them and pick what you want. Or you could do it by these things we call modules. And modules, every month I present 5 new videos. And we're coming up on module 5. You can just go by module. So if you've already watched all the videos and you just want to see whatever the 5 new ones are, and you're going in order and you're doing everything I'm giving you, which is a lot. Because I say, take your time with it. The videos are up there if you subscribe to the thing. And the subscription is very reasonable. It's $28.95 if you're monthly. And it's $19.99 a month if you go yearly and just do one payment of $239.95.
That is unbelievably reasonable, folks.
It's very right. It's very inexpensive, and because I'm doing the Skype lessons. But again, I have only so many hours in the day, and I want to present this material. I think it's good, and I think I present it a different way. So I do these videos, and then I watch the video, and then I make notes for the student on the video, and I'll say, at this point in the video, I'll say, at 1 minute and 24 seconds in the video, I played this, and I transcribed what I played in the example. And so it was already written out for them, so they don't have to actually, so I'm even taking your notes for you. Yeah. And then you can look at the sheets, and you can print these out, put them in a notebook, and I have a practice planner there. But I wanted to give you an example about the root. Because a lot of people work with my books, and they've been working with them for years, and then I see them for a lesson, and I find that even though they can play the notes as I wrote them, they're missing a lot of stuff. There's a lot of other stuff that they're not aware of that could make them get more out of the material. So this month, coming up in the new module for April, I do that familiar lick, the honeysuckle rose lick.
Right.
Okay, but if you're not hearing that top note as the 11th, you have to hear it as the 11th, or it doesn't really mean anything. So that's what I talk about. So I talk about playing the chord. So now you're really hearing it in context.
Yeah.
See, because if I just play, so say you learn that in 12 keys, let's say I'll play it in another key. I would say to the student, can you sing the root for me?
Right.
Can you sing up the chord? Ba, 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 ba. There you go. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. 11, 3, 5, 7, 9, 1.
And a lot of people would think that lick starts on the 9.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's the 11. Yeah, it starts on the 11.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
So you got that. And you can do an abbreviated version. Once you play the whole chord, if you want to just hit the bass note, that's fine. So this gets your ear hearing it because it's only the 11th if you're hearing an 11th below it. Now, there are other intervals involved for sure because you got all these. It's a minor third above the 9th. It's a perfect fifth above the 7th. Right? It's a minor 7th above the 5th. It's a major 9th above the 3rd. And it's a perfect 11th above the root. Right. So, yes, I'm hearing all those ways, but you want to hear it in context. Now, the other thing, and this is all in this video that I just did. I filmed it 2 days ago. And then I start talking about, well, when you're going to learn the lick or any tune, you need to break it down in a way that makes sense to your mind and to your ear. So I started playing it, thinking about what's going on with this lick. It's 6 notes. It sounds so cool. What's happening with it? And I noticed something about it. I call this the hook. I look for some kind of hook, something that ties the whole thing together. It's basically like this. It is 2 notes. It's 2 themes. It's a descending scale. That's going one direction, and it's got an alternate idea that's going up. It's got a minor third that's going up in the middle of it. So they've got this, and in the middle of all that, so, and then when you come back, is when you complete that 4-note scale.
That's, yeah.
Right, so so when I'm playing, you have to hear as the continuation of, you can't just hear it as 6 separate notes that don't have anything to do with each other, just the sequence of, that's not going to flow right. You have to hear it in your head. You have to hear it so that it makes some kind of musical sense to you. Now that makes sense to me. So I don't know if you're on camera here you can see a little bit of it. I notated it here.
Right. And
I show it with rests, where I show the main theme, and then I show the 2 notes that's sort of like a counter line going opposite direction. And then I just talk about, now, and you want to get your material. You got to get it really solid. That's half steps. Then, if you want to work on it, all the intervals, every lick and every interval, every direction. But then, if you want to work on it just for technique, because a lot of people have trouble with technique, you do this thing I call the speed bag. You ever watch a boxer? It's not like the big bag where they punch it and then the thing comes back and they punch. It's this little thing. They're going like this. They're going over and over again. Okay, so the speed bag applied to this. You start slow and you work it up. Then once you get it like that, try to get it softer. And keep your fingers very light. I call it whispering fingers. You want your fingers to be as light as possible. A lot of people are slamming the keys down. It's going to slow you down. It's going to make the technique not sound smooth. Once you get that, once you get that, then you add another one. Wow. You start adding them together, okay?
That's cool.
And so that's the speed bag. And you can do that with any of the licks. And sometimes I'll use it just for a particular register. The other thing that's nice, you can go both octaves. The other thing you can do that's simple for variations, do what I call doubles. Just do it twice on any part of the lick, and you'll have a variation.
Yeah.
Because to be a good soloist, you need to be an expert at theme and variation. I always think about like 20 variations on a theme by Haydn or something, you know. So it's like any of these licks in my books, or, you know, you should be able to come up with 20 variations instantly on any of these, you know. And that's important because you need, when you're improvising, you don't want to just have, oh, I'm going to play this lick when I get to this measure. First of all, it's never convincing, and it stands out. It jumps out. It's not going to be convincing. It has to happen naturally in the flow of things. And so you can't just have one way. I always think of it like, I call it high mileage. Like a professional, say he has 3 licks, but he's got 100 different ways of playing each of those 3. The amateur has 100 licks, but only one way of playing each of the 100.
Wow, yeah.
The pro is going to get way more mileage and use out of those 3 licks than the amateur will get out of the 100 licks, because he can adapt them and make them fit different chords, and he can stretch them and make them longer, and he can make them shorter. He can edit them. So that's really, you know, and the thing, you know, lick, it is a 4-letter word, I guess, but it's turned into a 4-letter word. But, you know, it's, you need vocabulary, okay? So, yeah, because, you know, some people say, oh, I don't want to be a lick player. Oh, so it's like, oh, you would rather just play a bunch of random notes and scales. Like, that's not good either. Really, I want to be a melody player. I want to create these spontaneous melodies that stand on their own. To me, that's what Stan Getz, like his solos could be melodies. They could just be songs in their own right. So the lick thing, the licks help give you a stronger connection of whatever you're hearing coming out of the horn. You play that lick in 12 keys, it's a definable goal. He's like, da da do do dee da dee da do do dee da. Even if you never use that lick because you choose not to use it, you have established a very strong connection because you know what's coming out of the horn is what you're intending to come out, not just some random notes in a group from a scale. And I'll end you because we're running out of time here. I'll leave it end with one of my other funny analogies about using licks. This is what I call the good toupee theory. You'll never see someone go into a room and say, hey, look at the great looking toupee on that guy. No, they'll only say, look at that horrible toupee. If it's a good toupee, they can't see that it's a toupee, okay? That's the way you have to use licks. If they can tell you're using licks, then you've got a bad toupee.
That's awesome.
Okay? So that's my good, bad toupee theory. Yeah.
That's awesome. And you know, this is, my gosh, it's so funny. You answered a whole bunch of questions I had just from the stories and just from the, you know, the way you outline this. This is awesome. Where can people, first of all, find you? Where can they find the membership site? It's,
go to just www.gregfishmanjazzstudios.com.
Okay. And also, where else online are you as well?
I have a YouTube channel, and so if you want to see some samples, I originally filmed, I think I've got almost 50 videos up there just through the years that I filmed just with the iPhone. But for the video site, you know, it's much better production. I actually bought a Canon SLR camera and lighting equipment, and you know, I mean, I did the whole thing, and you know, I bought a great microphone for the camera, so it's higher production, you know, quality. But you can at least see the style of the way that I teach. I use a lot of analogies, and I try to make it fun and very user-friendly. Whatever level you're at, doesn't matter. You know, a lot of people, that's the reason I did that website, because some people, they come to me for the lesson, and they're so nervous to play in front of me. Yeah. Like, they don't want me to hear them or something like that. Or like, oh, I wasn't ready. Now, I'm very different than Joe Daley in this regard. We can get, I don't know if you read, I put a thing up on my blog called The Story of Jason and the Almost Canceled Lesson.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Jason, this guy contacted me, said, I didn't have enough time to practice this week. I want to cancel the lesson. This is like 20 minutes before the lesson. You know, I said, we should do the lesson anyway, because in that hour, we're going to be working on things. I'm going to be showing you things you would never, ever come up with. I will help you work through the material that you didn't work on. And at the end of that hour, you're going to have accomplished so much more than you would have done even if you practiced, you know, 50 hours on your own, because you're going through it with me and you're kind of hearing it through my ears. It's like, basically, you're practicing, I'm showing you how I would practice it, and then you're practicing in real time the same way that I would work on it if I were in your position. Except knowing what I know. So I don't believe that, you know, you can, I'm not saying you should show up unprepared to a lesson, but you shouldn't cancel a lesson because you think you're not ready. I'm like, I'm still refining things I learned from Joe Daley when I was 16. I'm 51 now. I'm working on them at a much higher level now, but one of the great things about music is there is no limit to how great you can get. And I always know I've reached a new level of hearing when I'm listening to the same old records that I've heard and I hear something new. It's like, man, I never noticed that. He's doing this thing on, you know, it's like, I've heard this record since I was 12, but now, yeah, there's something else going on in there. It's like, yeah, I heard a Getz recording the other day, Getz Out Go-Go, on this solo he did on Summertime. This was actually because I had a great stereo with a new pair of speakers. And it's like, man, he played this phrase because he was reacting to what the bass player played, and I couldn't hear it before. Now I hear this bass player do this thing, and it's like, oh man, now it makes really a lot of sense. But I hear other things though. I hear other levels, like I'm hearing something, and I look at a transcription I did from when I was young, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't notate that Sonny Stitt was using the side B flat on that fingering and the side C. I didn't hear it then. I knew he was hitting a C, but now I hear it's a side C. So it's sort of like going from like a low resolution camera, 2 megapixel, okay, 8. Okay, how about 60? It's like these guys who are the masters, I mean, they're like at 100, megapixel, and it's so detailed. The amount of depth and detail is incredible. So that will make you better as a player. That's the other thing too. If you're going to be a student, you got to listen and do a lot of listening to the masters, because that's where it comes from. It's like, if you're not going to be a listener, that's like saying, I want to learn Japanese, but I don't want to watch any Japanese TV shows, and I don't want to actually hear any Japanese people speak. I just want to learn it myself. It doesn't work like that. You have to immerse yourself in the language and the culture. I went out to hear live jazz all the time. I mean, that's how I got to study with Joe Henderson. I was there 5 nights a week. If he was playing 5 nights, I was there for every set, all 5 nights. And one night he saw that I was there a lot, and he said, hey, is there any place to go eat? I'm starving. I said, yeah, right across the street, there's a cool little coffee shop. And so we hung out for like 3 hours and just talked that night. And it turned into a thing. So anytime he'd come to town, we'd go out to eat every night after his gig, just me and him. And we'd sit there and we'd talk about stuff. And then I started studying with him.
Wow.
And I was 18, and it was like such a bit. And same thing like James Moody. That's how I met him at the Jazz Showcase, famous place in Chicago. And I learned so much seeing these guys play in person. And then when I go home and hear their record, it meant something more. There was something extra in it. And so it's really important. Like if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to go see this person, I'll see him later. Go see him now. People could be gone any second. I really regret that I didn't get to see Sonny Stitt live or Dexter Gordon live, but I did see Johnny Griffin, and I saw Art Blakey, and I saw Dizzy Gillespie, and I saw Stan Getz, my hero, and I got to meet him, and I got to be friends with Stan the last 4 years of his life.
Wow.
And I got to, hang with him in person at Carnegie Hall at his dressing room. And I got to do a tour with Michael Brecker all over Japan. We did 16 cities together on a big festival in 2002. And I got to hang with him. And Michael's the reason the whole book came out, because at that time, Hal Leonard had rejected my Etudes Volume 1. They didn't want to put it out. And I resubmitted it a few times. They wanted me to change it and make it simpler and all this. And they still rejected it a third time. And I told this to Michael. We were on the bus in Japan touring. He said, I want to check it out. Send it to me. And he called me the next day after we got back to the States. He said, this thing is great. Start your own company. Put it out. I'm going to give you an endorsement for the back cover. And he did. And I always think if that first book hadn't been as good as it is, none of the other books would have happened. That first book had to be really special. And, people ask me this all the time. I know we're going along. If you're starting with my book series of Etudes, start with Etudes 3, then Etudes 1, then 2, then 4. And if you're more beginning than that, use the phrasing series, because the phrasing series is just what it says. It's about breathing and phrasing and hearing sequences and voice leading. It's all built in there. So just by the act of playing it, the way I wrote it and playing along with me, your breathing will be good. And one final thing that's real funny about phrasing. It's the most succinct thing. There's a newscaster. I listen to news radio a lot when I'm driving in traffic in Chicago. And this woman goes on there and she says, and now the time will be 6:23. So 6:23. So that is a perfect example of bad phrasing. Okay. So that really says it right there. So she takes these breaths so she'll take a breath before the last word of a sentence, and then she'll start with that word, and then that goes into the next news story. So you can't even tell, like the stories are blurring together, but this woman's been there forever. So she must just have some kind of seniority or something. Nice woman, I've met her, but she's terrible at reading copy. So she just puts the spaces wherever. Like there's no word groupings going on. And so it's the same thing. So when I tell people about phrasing, you don't want to do that the way she reads the time. The time is 3:25.
Drive me nuts.
But it's perfect for demonstrating it. And this is one of my teaching approaches where it's different than other teachers. I take things like that from everyday life, and I try to convert that to a way we can use it to learn about music.
Yes, definitely.
Because my music learning thing is on 24/7. So
people can relate to that. And I got to, first of all, thank you for spending so much time with us. But the things that I got and that I appreciate so much from you, your level of detail, your level of really internalizing things, just getting really deep into things, and finding ways to explain things so that people can understand it. I think it's just, it's amazing. It's astounding,
Oh,
actually.
thanks. That's my specialty. And this is why, like, I don't, people have asked me why I don't teach it. I've done a lot of master classes around the world at universities, but they ask me, why, how come you never went on the staff of, now, I'm not saying it'll never happen, but it would have to be a situation where I'm free to do it exactly. The way I teach is not, I call it non-academic. It's not traditional. It's non-traditional. It's what I call real world or anti-academic, or,
Yes.
And so it's stuff that I learned as a pro player in the real world, and the way that I put these things together myself so that I could understand them. And the academic institution approach seems to be that they want to have more of a cookie cutter thing and say, these are the rules, learn these scales, and you play this way. And I just don't agree with that whole philosophy. I think you have to be able to take whatever stuff happens to you in your daily life and figure out a way to convert that to your music so it all fits together. It has to be more organic than just saying, here's the mode. So you see an altered dominant, you just play a diminished whole tone scale. It's the seventh mode of melodic minor. It's still cut and dry, and there's no feeling in it. Like the old guys were picking those notes out of an emotion. They wanted to portray a certain mood or feeling. And that's why they picked the sharp 9, not because they learned in Improv 101 that you should play the sharp 9 because it's a note in the diminished whole tone scale. That's not a good enough reason to play it. You have to actually be experiencing that sound. It's like, yeah, I want this. And it's different than the sound of the sharp 11 or the flat 9. They're all different. So it's like, I can't help myself with these analogies. Cupcakes. I pick out a cupcake and, they're all the same. They're all chocolate cupcakes, but I see that one of them's got more frosting. I'm a kid. And I want the guy to give me that one. He's giving me the one closest to him. And I'm like, no, I don't want that one. He's like, come on, kid, they're all the same. Like, no, I want this one. The third one from the right, that's the one I want. That specific cupcake. That's how you got to be when you're playing. It has to be that specific. Like, no, you don't want just any altered note. You want the flat 9, or you want the sharp 9 or the sharp 11. You can't say, oh, any of them is good enough for me. I don't care. No, you'll never be a good player like that. You have to be so picky. And that's how you got to be as a soloist. You can't be settling for the note close to the note you wanted. It has to either be the note you wanted or it's not it. That's all it is. You can't take a word close to the word you want. It has to be the exact word you want. And so the better vocabulary, the wider your vocabulary, you don't want to just say small. You might want to say tiny or minute or teeny or infinitesimal, right?
Definitely.
Microscopic, so the wider your vocabulary, the more detailed you can be when you're making these choices. And the pros have huge vocabulary. They have such depth in their playing. And the amateur or the beginner or intermediate player, it's very shallow. They haven't listened to that much. They're trying to play by just remembering some key signatures or trying to play by means of avoidance, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And they get frustrated. And that's, I think, why they have trouble, because you have to connect the emotional part, convert that into notes over chords, and then find a way to get those specific notes to come out of the horn. And while you're playing the note, the A on the horn, in your head, you have to hear the whole chord. So you hear the A specifically as a third or a fifth or a seventh. Now, you don't always have to be able to put the label on it like that, but it has to have a specific location. Just like if I park my car on the 7th floor of the parking garage, somewhere in the back of my head, I know I'm on the 7th floor, not the 3rd floor.
Yes, in order to find your car, absolutely.
Right. So it's like finding your notes. That's why I can solo and keep track of all my stuff. It may seem like there's a million things going on, but it's very organized. I put them all there on purpose, even if it happens quickly. None of them got there by accident. There's not one accidental word. When I'm saying this, I used to be able to do this. Okay, when I'm talking, so aluminum, light bulb. When I'm talking in the middle, shoelace. I may throw in some random monkey words in the middle, and it's very distracting, light bulb. See, that's what the amateur player. They're throwing in random notes, thinking that maybe they're going to get lucky, and it's going to hit, some great note in a chord somewhere or something like that. There's zero luck at all. So it ends up just being a distraction from what they're trying to say when you start throwing in random. And it's hard to talk like that. I used to have a whole thing where I could talk really fast and throw in a bunch of random vocabulary words. But it's hard. You have to work that. What the amateur is doing in some ways is actually harder than what the pro is doing, because it doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. When you study a Charlie Parker solo, it's total logic. I mean, he's a genius, but there's no, even though there's a lot of notes, they are all functional notes. They have a reason for being there. He used them. They're all active.
Yeah.
And when the amateur player is playing, there's a lot of notes that were unintentional notes, and maybe they only really meant about 2% of the notes that they're playing. And so, you know, you got to weed it out and all that stuff. So anyway, there's all kinds of philosophy stuff. There's all kinds of like other issues, like people play, I call defensive playing, because they think they're nervous and they got to be playing something and they want to impress people, you know. And then the old pro comes out and plays like a whole note, and that's better than anything like the amateur did.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because the theme here that I'm seeing from your first teacher in high school that said to you, okay, in order to play these society gigs, you have to learn these standards. And from that point, you memorized a whole bunch of tunes, melodies, right? Not necessarily knowing what the chords were or whatever, but the whole theme of today has to deal with, if you can't hear it, you can't play it.
Can't play it, that's right.
Really, that's right. What it is. And this is a perfect illustration of that. Your life. Your music life is a perfect illustration of that. And especially what's really poignant for the listeners and the viewers, the spot where Greg was singing a line and just playing it, singing a line, just playing it, singing a line and just playing it.
Yeah, you should be able to do that. If you can't do that, that's what you need to be working on right now.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they'll say, oh, I can't sing, I don't have a good voice. You know, I'm not a singer. You're trying to sing just to get the pitches. So you make sure that you're matching what's hearing in your head. You're not singing because you're going to stand up in front with a microphone and sing in front of a room full of people. Yeah. But you need to be able to, you have to be honest with yourself. Am I really playing the notes I'm hearing in my head? You have to be hearing specific notes. If you're not hearing specifically and you're just playing by either remembering the key signature or just wiggling your fingers, if you're just playing by finger, I call this the chicken with its head cut off. That's that type of playing. The chicken's running around, but it's not running any place specifically. It's just muscle memory, you know, muscle, and it's not, muscle memory is not reliable. You know, you'll forget it. Here, I've got one final anecdote. That kid I was friends with who played clarinet in 7th grade, we went to a solo and ensemble contest. We both played the middle movement of the Mozart concerto, except I memorized mine because I was so determined to really be impressive. But I memorized it by playing the thing, reading it, and then playing it like 1,000 times. And first of all, I was so dumb because the judge didn't even know I memorized it because I stood right in front of the music stand and played it. So as far as he was concerned, I was reading it. And I got so nervous, my hands were shaking, and I forgot like half of the things. And I remember I got like a number 2 rating, and my friend got a number 1. He hardly even practiced it at all, but he just went in with the music, put it on the thing, and read it. And that was a very good lesson for me because it taught me that muscle memory is unreliable. The reason what is very reliable is the ear. The ear never forgets. You know, so if you hear it and your fingers just simply find the location of what you're hearing, there's nothing to be nervous about because as long as you hear the sound of it, you can find it. But if you're not hearing it and you're trying to rely simply on this sequence of muscle moves, you will forget that every time. That, especially under pressure, that will fail you. And so that was a much more valuable lesson than if I had gotten a 1 rating along with my friend. It was good that I got that 2 rating because it taught me. It was an unintentional lesson. I mean, no one told it to me, but it's just something I realized from it. I was like, man, I could not have practiced that piece more, yet I still, when I came under pressure, I got nervous and my fingers failed me, even though I had practiced the piece so much. It's because I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't hearing it, and I wasn't tying in the sounds with the location of the sound. If you can do that, you will be confident because I don't have to worry about playing this horn. If I hear something and I hear it sounds good, I can pick up the horn and exactly mirror what I'm hearing. And that gives you all the confidence in the world. It doesn't, you know, it's just great. There's just like, it's priceless. You know, you can't put a price on that. And I didn't get that from school. I got to say, it did not come from the academic approach. It came from my real world approach that it had to. And also when I was young and you first go to a jam session, you walk in with like a real book and the older guys are like, you're not getting up on the stage with that thing. You're going to play with us. You're going to use your ear, you know, and, you know, you got 1 chorus to solo. And there's no music to look at, and that's it, you know. And I got really good at listening. It really raised my, you know, my concentration level and my hearing. I started paying attention to the other players and trying to pick up something if I could tell, you know, what they were playing. So a lot of it's concentration. People don't know how to focus their energy. This is the thing, getting back to the video site. A lot of my teaching techniques involve exercises where you're learning the chords or scales, but you're also learning how to focus your concentration on all these little details at once. It's just that the scales or chords is just a vehicle. So you're getting some extra benefit of technique or whatever. But the main point often is this: that it's setting up your mind to think like an improviser, to be able to keep track of little details and keep track of a theme and variation on the theme. even when you're practicing scales or even when you're practicing chords. I mean, there's all these different ways of doing it, and it makes it fun. And I'll tell you this too: if you're bored when you're practicing wrong. Because practicing is, I have a great time practicing. It's totally fun for me. Even now, all these years, I still love practicing. So when people say, "Oh man, I'm just trying to put in," if you're putting in the time and it feels like drudgery, you should just not do it. Just put the horn down, because you're wasting your time. You will not remember it. Whatever you're doing, if it's not compelling while you're practicing it and it's not fun, then it's just like busy work, and you're not. You might get a little technique out of it, but it won't stick. It has to be actively involved. It has to be fun. You have to give yourself permission to not. Now, I was always so down on my playing, and I'm still very, very critical. I'm my own worst critic. But you have to give yourself permission to feel good about what you're playing and you're practicing. You can't say, "Oh man, I just suck. I'm just no good. I'll never be good," because it creates this kind of negative feedback loop thing, and your brain is sort of wired to avoid pain. And so most people, they're going to try to, then they're going to forget the things they practice because they feel so bad about themselves. So you have to try to focus on something. And this is not just touchy-feely, pleasant thoughts or, positive feeling, or everyone gets a trophy for showing up. It's not like that, but it has to be, think about it like this. The music is bigger than you, and the music is bigger than me. It is to me, it's almost like religion, music. It's out of respect to the music and the beauty of the music that you try to be worthy of. It's a great gift. And like, I just want to be, deserving of this. I want to try to find beauty in it. And I want that to be part of my playing. So when I'm practicing, my whole goal is to strive to make it sound nicer, more pleasant, more beautiful, more emotional, more personal. And it's not just this mechanical thing or this thing, well, I want to play to impress people, or I want to play to be famous. Like, that's all not good. It all has to just be for the music. It's just the love of the music, and you want to be able to communicate. And it communicates. It really is a universal language, and whatever language you speak. I go to Japan and I play, and it's like, or China or somewhere, or Mexico. I play gigs with people who don't even speak English, and we play great together, and it's amazing to me, that, we can't even talk about the name of the song, but I can start playing and they can start playing along with me, and they hear what I'm doing and they can react to it. It's like, man, that's amazing. So you got to have the right attitude to it too. There were years when I was in college, especially, I was really dark on my playing, and I was just always so angry and upset. And I finally just realized that it was just a waste of energy. It was just wasted energy that could have been put to better use. And I wish if I could go back and tell my younger self, I could have even been better, because I wasted so much time and energy being angry at myself for not being better than I was. That if it had just been positive, I had such a low self-esteem. And I think that's common among a lot of artists. But finally, I think I was reading a lot of self-help books and things like that. And I finally came to the realization that I was getting what they call a secondary gain. I was getting this gain of being miserable. Like, it was some kind of sick cycle where I was like, I got some kind of strange pleasure about being really mad all the time at myself for not being a better player. And it gave me a reason for being mad, But then the problem was, you play better, and then you're still mad about something else, and you play even better, and now you're mad about something. It's a separate thing. Like, you have to separate that. Like, the anger part of it should not even enter into it. Like, or this negative feeling. When you're playing, it should be all positive. Now, you might play something that's an emotional thing, or it feels sad. That's not what I mean. It should always be some kind of positive feeling of the experience of playing music. Whatever emotion you want to portray across the gamut, that's fine. But a lot of people are so down on themselves that they don't allow themselves to enjoy playing. And as a result, I saw someone, I think it was Jerry Seinfeld, he said on some interview, he said, people want to see other people having a good time.
Yeah.
People don't want to see people struggling, or having a miserable time, So you're on stage playing, like, you look at Cannonball Adderley, he's like having a ball, he's having a great time when he's playing. And other guys, they're a little more still, like Joe Henderson, but he's a little more cerebral because he's just standing still. Or Sonny Rollins, but these guys are all having fun. They're like digging in and they're enjoying it. They're not self-conscious. They're not feeling that they're bad while they're playing. And so the amateur, that gets across in the music, that negativity starts coming through the horn, that, where you're unsure of yourself or you're embarrassed. Like, you got to get over my old teacher, Joe Daley, called them inhibitions. He said, you have to get over your inhibitions and not be worrying about trying to impress people. You have to just play, for yourself, basically, and be honest, play what you really mean to play. Don't try to play to impress.
And that is awesome. And I think that's a great way to end this interview.
Yes.
This is so awesome, Greg. Thank you so much for your time. And everybody, remember to go to Greg Fishman
Jazz Studios.
Check out the membership site. And also, if you don't have his books yet, what are you waiting for? Okay.
Yeah.
Go to
Get the books. And I can fit more Skype people. We can't go every week, but we can go every couple weeks, every 3 weeks. What a lot of people do is they subscribe to the site, and then they maybe have 2 or 3 lessons a year with me. And I kind of check up and see what they're doing and give them some live feedback on what they're playing. But the video lesson, we've got about 100 subscribers so far, and it just launched January 1st. So it's going really well.
Cool.
And we've got a forum on there, and there's going to be other things coming up in the future that I can't disclose yet, but there's all kinds of stuff coming up in that site that's really incredible.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Greg.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Okay, you too.